Hello, everyone. Welcome to PPAN's May webinar, Pollinators After Dark, How Light Pollution Impacts the Night Shift. Thanks so much for joining us. We are really excited to have guest speaker Richard O'Brien here with us today. My name is Anna Gray Anderson, and I am the Community Engagement Manager for People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN for short. For those of you who aren't familiar with our webinar series, we usually host a monthly event, so be sure to sign up for our newsletter and check out our events calendar to keep up to date with all of those upcoming events. We can put this link in the chat for you. And we have prepared a great session for you today, but first wanted to tell you a little bit about us. So, like I said, we are People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN, the host of this webinar. We focus a lot on making Colorado a safe haven for all who live here, from people to pollinators. We do this through grassroots advocacy, education, and outreach, kind of like this webinar. We also do a lot of work with policy, community mobilization, and habitat creation. A good example of that would be our Habitat Fund grants program, which is based on the sales of the pollinator license plate. And that grant program goes towards creating pollinator safe spaces while promoting community mobilization. And if you haven't gotten that pollinator license plate yet, we can put a link in the chat for that as well. And again, just wanted to emphasize the significance of the Protect Pollinators license plate. PPAN championed the legislation that created this plate, and the majority of the donations for that plate go directly to that Habitat Fund grants program. And so by getting a plate, you'll be contributing directly to getting more native plants in the ground, which leads to more pollinators. So we're really grateful to have speaker Richard O'Brien with us today. Richard has been an active member of DarkSky Colorado since 2016, contributing to its mission to protect night skies through advocacy, education, and outreach. From 2019 to 2023, he served on the board of DarkSky Colorado and continues to support the organization as the Northeastern Colorado Regional Coordinator. In recognition of his outstanding dedication, he received the Sirius Star Award in 2019, honoring him as the brightest star in the Colorado chapter. Richard also represents DarkSky Colorado at community and environmental events, including the Colorado Pollinators Summit and the Big Day of Bugs, where he helps raise awareness about the connection between dark skies and ecological health, which the Big Day of Bugs is actually coming up on June 27th at the Denver Botanic Gardens in celebration of Colorado Pollinator Month. We can put a link to this in the chat and the iNaturalist project associated with the Big Day of Bugs. And before we get started, and as a reminder, please stay muted. Please leave your questions in the chat and we will keep track of those questions. We are recording this presentation and we'll post it to our YouTube channel soon. And we'll also be sending out a follow-up link to that recording. We also encourage you to make a donation today so that PPAN can continue to host this free webinar series. These donations will also support our education, advocacy, and habitat creation efforts. A donation of any size really does make a difference, so thank you for your consideration. And again, another way to support this work is by getting that pollinator license plate. And again, we'll put these links in the chat to make it easy for people. And with that, I will stop sharing and pass it off to Richard. Thank you for being here, Richard.
Great. Well, thank you, Anna Gray. I appreciate you and your colleagues at People and Pollinators Action Network for inviting me to be a part of this event today. This is wonderful. Well, she already introduced me. I'm Richard O'Brien, and I'm going to talk about pollinators and light pollution. More particularly about nocturnal pollinators, but we won't forget the diurnal pollinators as well. She already mentioned some of these things about me, but I'm a volunteer for DarkSky Colorado. I serve as the Northeastern Colorado coordinator for DarkSky Colorado and enjoy talking with people about light pollution. I do lots of events around the northeastern quadrant of Colorado, but I do events in other parts of the state too. And I may have met some of you here today at one of the Colorado Pollinator Summits or the Big Day of Bugs or something like that, because I've been involved in those things. I live in Boulder, but try not to hold that against me too much. I love to hike and spend time outdoors, including bird watching and stargazing. So why are we gathered today to talk about pollinators when there's so many serious problems to be concerned about? Well, for me, spending time in nature is really good for me. I'm a better, healthier, more effective person if I spend regular time each week outside in nature. And I think we owe it to ourselves and our communities to focus a significant portion of our time on nature. Pollinators need us to be advocates now, regardless of political changes. So I know there's a lot going on in the world. I recently saw a person holding a sign, and the sign said, "So many problems, so little cardboard." And I thought that was kind of funny because there really are a whole lot of things to distract us right now. But we need to stay the course to a certain extent of our interest in helping pollinators and helping nature, because that doesn't go away just because we have other things to be concerned about. So today's session, I have about 30 minutes of presentation to give here, and then we'll have a chance to talk and have more discussion. We're going to talk a little bit about nocturnal pollinators. We're going to talk about what is the impact of light pollution on pollinators. And finally, we're going to talk about specific things we can do to our artificial lights for the benefit of pollinators. So first of all, before we even get started, I wanted to just mention, well, what are we talking about? What is light pollution? A lot of you may know this already, but there are basically three different aspects we talk about all the time. Sky glow, which is the glowing cloud of light over cities. Glare, which really affects pollinators. We're talking individual lights causing a disability to a plant or an animal. And finally, light trespass, which is mostly a human concern. It's when light is trespassing across property lines. And of course, plants and animals don't care very much about human property lines. So that's less of an issue. But here's a photo of each. Sky glow, if you see over on the right-hand side of the picture, there's a glowing mass of air because there must be a city over there. You can't see it, it's over the horizon, but there's still a glowing mass of air. And as you can see, it covers up most of the stars. You can't see many stars in that direction. But over on the left side of the photo, you see lots of stars because there must not be a city off in that direction. Glare, which is the issue most important to pollinators, and we've all had experiences where glare has kept us from being able to see what we needed to see. But it's even worse for nocturnal animals because they're not adapted well to bright lights, and we're used to being able to see in sunlight, for heaven's sake, but nocturnal pollinators really can't adapt to light this bright, and so they're completely disabled and unable to function in this kind of light. And then finally, light trespass. Like I say, it's more of a human issue. It's when light goes across property lines. So these people are all suffering from their neighbors' bad lighting. And that's light trespass, and that's illegal in most places in Colorado, but it varies by city and county. So turning to nocturnal pollinators now. First of all, who are nocturnal pollinators? Well, mostly moths in Colorado. We have more moths that are nocturnal pollinators than anything else, but also to a certain extent, beetles. A couple of species of bees are active at night, believe it or not. Bats, and some other animals that actually accidentally pollinate things. So moths are the big group. In Colorado, what do we have in terms of moths? Well, there are hundreds of species of moth in Colorado. 160,000 species worldwide. Not most of them don't occur in Colorado. I've seen photos of Colorado moths, the species number over 200. Butterfly Pavilion says there's more than that, but I haven't actually seen them. They could be there, but who knows? I mean, they're mostly active at night and they're really hard to see. So not all moths are nocturnal or pollinators, but most of them are both nocturnal and pollinators. They have a huge variety, as you can imagine, with the hundreds of species. We've also got a huge variety of colors and shapes. They're not all brown, although many are brown. There are some brightly colored moths too. And there are shapes, for instance, some of them are shaped kind of like butterflies, and so it's kind of hard to tell the difference in some cases. Some moths are colorful, like butterflies are colorful. So how do you tell the difference between a moth and a butterfly? Well, here's the simple answer. First of all, we said moths come in lots of shapes and colors. They're not all brown and they're not all triangles, but all moths have feathery antennae. If you see this moth on the left and you see the feathery antennae, that is a characteristic of pretty much all moths. Now, not all moths have antennae this large and prominent, but they all have feathers. Butterflies, on the other hand, do not have feathery antennae. They have straight antennae with a club on the end. So that's how, if you have an animal and you're not sure whether it's a moth or a butterfly, look at the antennae. So nocturnal pollinators, are they important pollinators or not? Well, it varies by plant species, first of all. Perhaps research shows us that perhaps a third to a half of all pollination visits are nocturnal pollinators rather than diurnal. And that, of course, is by plant species. There's one example study I have in mind that was done in an Arkansas apple orchard. And this study found that over 50% of the pollinator visits were nocturnal pollinators, and under 50% were diurnal pollinators. So some species, nocturnal pollinators, are really, really important, and they don't deserve to be disregarded. Nocturnal pollinators also sometimes carry pollen for a very much longer distance than diurnal pollinators do. As I understand it, most diurnal pollinators are kind of local. They stay near home a lot, but moths travel great distances. And some of you may have seen Miller moths coming through the Front Range, Colorado Front Range urban corridor in the past couple of weeks. But by June, they'll all be gone because they will have finished their migration up into the mountains and we won't see them again for a while. They don't do any harm, but they do travel a great distance in some cases. So most plants are visited by multiple different kinds of pollinators, both diurnal and nocturnal. There are a few exceptions, a few species of plant that are specialized to only one particular pollinator. But most, 95% of plant species out there are visited by multiple pollinators. So both nocturnal and diurnal. So here's the elephant in the room. Why do we tend to ignore nocturnal pollinators? If they're so important, then why don't we pay any attention to them? Well, there are some very good reasons for that. First of all, we see diurnal pollinators when they're active, and all of us can imagine a time when we watched a bee crawling around on a flower, but it's almost impossible to see a moth crawling around a flower because they won't do it if it's not dark enough. And if it's dark enough, we can't see it. So there's a very practical reason that we don't think about nocturnal pollinators very much. But then there's also bias against moths and other nocturnal pollinators. popular culture doesn't feature moths the same way. They're often seen as pests. Okay, although in Colorado, they're not really pests. I can't think of any species that causes problems to humans in Colorado, but in general, we stereotype moths as being bad animals. And it's unfortunate because they're not. They do good stuff that we need. And finally, scientists don't prefer to do studies at night and lose sleep in order to study nocturnal species. And I read recently that for every moth study, there are 22 studies, published studies of bees. So one moth study, 22 studies of bees. So that's certainly not in proportion to how much pollination they do. Okay, in popular culture, we see lots of images of bees, and they're always friendly, you know, with big smiley faces and big eyes. And, you know, we always have good feelings about the cartoon images we see of bees. And there are also lots of popular depictions of bees. Like this is a Saturday Night Live skit that was on bees, and Saturday Night Live did a whole bunch, like a dozen or more skits featuring bees, people dressed up as bees. And it was really funny. And we can all probably think of more recent bee movies and things like that. Bees are common in popular culture, and moths, not so much. Now, they're not completely absent. There are a few images of moths out there. This is a cartoon image of a moth with a smiley face, even though most moths don't have a smile like that. But actual moths are really pretty cute. Here's an example of a couple of eomoths that I think that are just adorable animals. And because their fur is yellow, bright yellow, it makes it easy to see their face and their antennae and so forth. And these are really attractive, I think, attractive animals. And here's another view of an eomoth, one that's more familiar to people with the big eye spots, which is quite famous. And the bright colors. Notice this one is not all brown. But I love photos like this one showing a moth drinking nectar from a flower. But it occurs to me that this is kind of a cheat because the photographer probably used a flash. It was probably completely dark in this scene. It certainly wasn't daylight in this scene because the moth wouldn't have been there. It would have to be dark for the moth to approach this flower, and then the photographer used a flash in order to get this picture. And that must have really confused the moth. Okay, so there are some differences in the way we humans see things and the way pollinators probably see things. The top line up there is about human vision, and we see all the colors between violet and red. Basically, we have to interpolate the colors that are in between the peaks, but we see a full range of colors from purple to red. We see nothing in the ultraviolet range. You see down at the left end there, the short wavelengths, we can't detect that at all. It's completely invisible to us. Okay. However, humans can, for a diurnal animal, we see really well at night. In very dim conditions, we see pretty well. However, when we see well at night in really dim conditions, we don't see in color, we see in black and white. Unlike probably most species of insect probably see colors even in very low light conditions. So they see colors all the time, basically, even when it's very dim, just starlight or moonlight. And they see quite well in the ultraviolet range where we can't see anything at all. So they probably see a whole lot more than we do in nighttime conditions with just stars and moonlight. Now, of course, this varies a little bit by species, and this is a little bit of a generalization, this little chart, but this gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Now, scientists will generally look at one species at a time and try to plot what wavelengths they see and so forth, and it varies from one species to the next exactly what wavelengths they see. So, like I said, this is a simplification, but a generalization. So, what impact does our artificial light at night have on nocturnal pollinators? Well, studies show that there's a profound direct impact. I've seen several studies that have found that nocturnal pollination activity completely stops under artificial light. They found under their test conditions that there were no nocturnal pollination visits if there was artificial light present. Now, other studies are a little bit more nuanced, and they maybe place the lights a little bit differently, and they come up with a little different way of counting. But it's still a profound effect either way. My example here is the 2017 Nature study that was done in Switzerland on cabbage thistle plants. And they did artificial street lights with lights on poles, basically. And they counted the number of pollinator visits under this artificial light. And what they found in this study was that there were 62% fewer pollinator visits and significantly fewer fruits produced. Now, I would bet that 62% fewer means not zero. There were still some visits, and they were probably plants that were in the shadows and weren't directly under one of the street lights. Because other studies have shown that if you put the plant directly under the street light, it won't get pollinated, period. Now, this is kind of surprising. There's more effect than I realized on diurnal pollinators. There's actually some direct impact of artificial light at night on diurnal pollinators. And this surprised the daylights out of me. I never would have expected this. But diurnal pollinator visits are altered by artificial light at night. It's not always decreased. In some cases, it varies by plant species. In some cases, it's increased. In some cases, it's decreased. And we'll see that in more detail in just a moment. What is less surprising is the indirect impact of artificial light on diurnal pollinators. Most species of plant and animal have an internal clock that gets reset by natural night. And if you take away natural night, you take away that species' ability to function properly. That includes humans, that includes birds, that includes mammals, all sorts of things. So there's an indirect impact of artificial light on diurnal pollinators. Basically, by taking away the night, you're hurting the daytime pollinators too. So here is a diagram that was actually published in one of these research studies that I just mentioned. On the left-hand side here, over on the left column, you see all the species of individual plants that were in the study. There are like 20 species of plant. And then column A, you see are all the diurnal pollinators that they had in the study. And then columns B, C, and D are actually subsets of that full group. They took out a third of the diurnal pollinators and looked at that and so forth. But if we just look at the column A, which is all diurnal pollinators, we see that there are a couple of species of plant here where diurnal pollination visits were increased the day after artificial light was shown on these plants. Why? I have no idea. And I haven't read even any hypotheses about this yet. And then there is a group of plants where it makes very little difference. Their diurnal pollination visits were not increased or decreased much. But then there are some plants where diurnal pollination visits were significantly reduced the day after artificial light was exposed to those plants. Again, this is a result that I never would have expected, and I'm glad that the researchers thought to study it, because it's something that I would not have, that's not common sense. Why would artificial light at night affect the next days during daylight pollination visits? That is really incredible. So I put this slide in because I wanted to mention too that our artificial lights have impacts on plants too. In this case, this gives examples of trees. There's a street light up here in the upper left-hand corner, and it's keeping part of this tree not able to realize that summer has ended and it needs to drop its leaves. Same thing is in the bottom photo. There's a street light and there's a patch of green leaves because that part of the tree hasn't realized that summer is over yet. So our artificial lights actually impact every species, not just what we would expect the nocturnal animals, but all species of plant and animal are affected by our artificial light. So what can we do practically to fix our artificial lights to make them better for the environment? Well, there's good news, and that is that the same modifications are good for many pollinators, are also good for other species. So humans, mammals, birds, all kinds of things. We actually have one set of recommendations that DarkSky has, and they are good for all species pretty much. Now, this graphic was partly sponsored by the Audubon organization, and I'm sure that they were thinking about helping birds when they put money into this. But again, our recommendations cover basically the whole of nature, and it's not specific to birds at all. Okay, one thing that we can do individually is that we can turn off unnecessary lights, and we can close our curtains at night to keep indoor light indoors, because the light shining from indoors out onto our plants keeps them from being pollinated too. Okay, the longer term things we can do are down here at the bottom. We can install motion sensors and timers to control lights so it's turned off when it's not needed. And most importantly, probably for pollinators, we can aim lights carefully so that they shine only where the light is needed, and have shielding so that the light isn't spilled into areas where it's not needed. So these are all things that we can do with our individual lights. But in a broader sense, what lighting designers have to think about for our public lighting, this is sponsored by the Illuminating Engineering Society, which is a professional group of professional lighting designers. Okay, so the professionals kind of know these principles already, but let's go through them real quickly here. One, light needs to be useful. So in other words, you need light to see where to put your key in the lock, but you don't need to light up the whole yard to do that. Second, light needs to be targeted, so aimed properly at the place where you need the light and nowhere else, and then shielded in a way that doesn't allow light to spill into other areas. 3, low level. Humans are really good at seeing in low light levels, and it's almost better that our artificial light at night is very low level. We can often see better as humans in lower level of light. Sometimes people think that they have to light it as bright as day, and that's not true. Humans generally cannot see as well if you use that much artificial light. 4, controlled, and I already mentioned motion detectors and timers. And 5, color, and we didn't know about this until about a decade ago. There were some studies done, and it turns out that bluish white light is bad for human health and bad for the environment too. So all of our outdoor lights should be yellowish white, but are toward the red end of the spectrum anyway. Okay, if you can use a red light, that's even better yet. But if you need white light, then a yellowish white light is the way to go. So here I am with a fixture display that I take when I go places and present in person. The 5 fixtures on the right side of the board there, you notice, are all lit up. Those are the ones that we would recommend, and notice there's no glare coming from any of them. They're all pointed at the ground. They provide lots of light, but not directly in our eye. The 3 fixtures on the left are what we would not recommend. Notice they're not lit up, because if they were, it would kill our ability to see anything else in the room. We would only see the glare and not anything else. And that happens in the outdoors too. If we have lights like that are turned on, it makes it harder to see rather than easier. So again, it's not no light at all, it's well-designed lighting that's important. So here's an example of a package. I think I was in a Home Depot store, and I pulled a package off the shelf and turned it around so that we could see this round sticker up in the right-hand corner that says DarkSky approved. And that is my organization, DarkSky International, that has this program that looks at the designs for commercially available lights and decides what meets our recommendations. And this design already met the recommendation. Now, we don't get any profit. We're a nonprofit organization. But we give the manufacturer permission to use our seal on this lighting to say, yeah, it's not just my marketing department that says it's DarkSky, but it's the DarkSky people who say that it's DarkSky too. So if you're buying stuff in a place like Home Depot, you can look for this seal, and that will help guide you toward the good stuff. Now, of course, places like Home Depot also sell lots of fixtures that are bad. And I always tell the anecdote that the Home Depot here in the town where I live sells as many bad lights as good. And I've asked them about that, and I said, these lights aren't legal in the city or the county, so who are you selling these lights to? And they say, well, we don't really care who buys them. If they pick them up off the shelf and buy them, then we sell them. And it's not our place to advise them on what's legal and what's not legal. So in my particular location, both the city and the county have regulations, and there are many lights that Home Depot sells that don't fit those recommendations. Okay, and there's one term that I want everyone to be aware of, and that is the term fully shielded. It's really misleading. It does not mean sufficiently shielded. The term is not used by lighting professionals currently. That professional group that I mentioned, the Illuminating Engineering Society, sets the standards for lighting terminology used in the United States, and they have asked their members not to use the term fully shielded anymore. It used to be a common term. In the 20th century, the term was used to mean shielded above the horizontal plane, which in 1960, people imagined, well, maybe that's enough. But by today's standards, that's not nearly enough. And that wouldn't be enough for humans. It wouldn't be enough for the birds. It wouldn't be enough certainly for pollinators. Nearly any fixture that is described as fully shielded is not sufficiently shielded by today's standards. So if you see that term fully shielded, walk away. And I wanted to close with one good example here. This is an example of really well-designed lighting. This is a pedestrian bridge over the Boulder Creek in downtown Boulder, where I live. And this is actually the center of town. You would expect the center of town, most places, to be really light polluted, but this is not so bad. But this bridge in particular is great. One of the design criteria for this bridge was they couldn't allow any direct light to fall on in the environment. So no direct light can fall on the plants underneath the bridge. And if you look underneath the bridge, you would see it's completely dark. And you can't actually take a photograph down there because it's dark. There's no light. But this, you can see the designer put the lighting inside underneath the railing, and it only shines down. It can't shine up. And even the slats there in the railings sides, they're beautiful, but they're diagonal, and they're engineered in a way that no direct light actually escapes onto the creek. And so this is fabulous. So this is an example of really practical lighting. It's good for humans, that is also good for the environment. And this is the kind of lighting we need to encourage in our communities. Things that both serve the purpose of lighting for humans and are good for the environment at the same time. So we can do this. We just need to be more intentional about it and not do things that are really bad design that cause harm. You know, we can help humans and still be easy on the environment at the same time. So that's all of the material I had. I was hoping we could have a few minutes to have discussion and talk.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was such a great presentation, very informative. And we actually did just see a report that came out from Be Wild that warned of new threats to pollinators that included your statistic that you shared that artificial light reduces visits by nocturnal pollinators by 62%. And that's just really interesting, and thank you so much.
Yeah, and of course that varies on what plant is the target and how the researchers counted too. So that you see some studies that are a little bit higher and some studies that are a little bit lower in terms of number, but it is significant impact in every study that I've found. Some studies it's 100% reduction. Other studies it's like 62% reduction. But it's no study has it at 5 or 10%.
Right. And we've got a few questions in the chat here that I'll ask you. And just a reminder for folks to put those questions in the chat, please. So someone was wondering about solar pathway and yard lighting. I think you touched on that a little bit with the bridge. But what kind of lighting, is that lighting okay for pollinators, or what effect does that have?
That's a good question. You know, the path lighting, it varies a lot. You know, the best path lighting is very well shielded so that it lights the path, but not the entire environment. So if you have path lighting with no shielding on it whatsoever, that's probably not so good. But you'll see some path lighting that'll be short 1 foot tall pedestal with shielding that looks kind of like a lampshade that's conical so that the light goes down and not out to the side. And that's what we'd be looking for. The other thing is fairly low intensity lighting that people see very well in low levels of light. You don't need to make it super bright in order to be effective. So another good thing for the environment is to keep the level way down. Now, solar path lighting tends to do that already because it's solar battery powered, it tends to be pretty low intensity to start with. But there are examples of really bright path lighting, which are not so good.
Right. Another question too that talks more about bright lighting here is people are wondering if there's been any research that shows whether or not LED lighting creates a worse environment for pollinators, humans, and the rest of life. I know we've been seeing lots of more LED lights and brighter lights and headlights in cars and things like that.
Yes. And I know that sometimes people are really irritated by the bluish white light that comes from LEDs sometimes. there was a period of about a decade where all LED outdoor lighting was bluish white. And we found out that that's really bad, that bluish white is a bad color. We should just ban it. In fact, the American Medical Association has said that all communities should ban that bluish white color. Um, and it's not just me talking, that's the American Medical Association. And they thought that there was enough research that bluish white was bad for human health that they should come out on this. And so that's saying a lot, really. But yeah, it's also been found through many different research studies to be bad for the environment in lots of different ways. So there's LED lighting that is bluish white, but now it's pretty easy to get LED lighting that is yellowish white, and that isn't so bad. And that actually has some benefits for the environment because it uses way less electricity, which means burning less fossil fuel, which is maybe good for the environment. So I would encourage yellowish white LED light whenever possible.
Yes, thank you. Here's another question here. Do you have any suggestions for discussing light trespass with local citizens or neighbors? And what can
That's
we
a
do
really
to
hard
educate?
thing to do. It's
Yeah.
hard to approach a neighbor because they almost always get defensive if you start to talk to them about this. My only suggestion, the only thing I've had good experience with, is to bring up the subject very generally, not talk about individual lights that anybody has, but talk about light pollution and how you're interested in this topic and get them thinking about it and realize on their own that their own lights maybe could be retrofitted, could be fixed. And if they come up with the idea and they think it's their own idea, then it'll get done. But if they think it's your idea, it won't get done.
That is a good way to broach that subject for sure. And would you say that would be the same thing for, educating city officials on the topic as well?
Yeah, I think they're less emotional about it. In my experience, most of the time talking with city officials, you can be a little bit more direct and matter of fact about it because they don't have a personal stake in the bad lighting that they already have in their city, and they will go, oh, gee, that's really bad. We need to fix that. So I often will show city officials or city council members photos of poorly designed lighting, and they will then see for themselves that, yeah, we need to fix that. So it's less of an emotional issue with city staff, I think.
Got it. Thank you. Our next question here, do you know of any local organizations that focus on native seed distribution to Colorado and regionally adapted that co-evolved with native moth and pollinator species? I know that we have a few partners that do that, Wild Ones, Colorado Native Plant Society, Wildlands Restoration Volunteers. Do you have any other
Yeah,
organizations?
Anna Gray, you and your people in Pollinators staff are the best resource for that. I'm not really an expert on seed banks, but I think it's wonderful all the things that are available, and I'm sure that you can come up with ideas there.
Yes, and if folks also want to check out our events calendar, there are a few native plant swaps coming up in Boulder and Longmont and Northern Colorado that people can check out and find those moth adapted plants.
I did want to mention, yes, lots of people these days are planting what they call moon gardens, which are especially designed to promote moth visitation. And a lot of these flowers, like evening primrose, open only in the evening, and so they really encourage nocturnal pollinators. There are also lots of species that have special coloration, special scents, and things like that to encourage nocturnal pollinators. Those are all good things. But you probably already have lots of nocturnal pollinators in your yard, and you haven't done anything directly to encourage them. They're just there, and you just don't know it because it's dark when they're there.
That's great.
So, and from what I've heard, that keeping the yard a little bit messy is really good for moths, like lots of insects, dead leaves and debris, things like that are really good for promoting moth habitat. So, uh, don't be real neat about picking up all your leaves in the fall and so forth, because the nocturnal pollinators need them.
For sure. And yeah, that's where I think those campaigns come with No Mow May and Leave the Leaves and all of that. So those definitely help with moth habitat. Which speaking of being hard to see moths and nighttime pollinators at night, is there a safe way to observe them without artificial light?
Good question. And Anna Gray and I were actually talking about this a little while ago. Um, I have a friend here in Boulder who actually likes to take photos of moths and has figured out a way to do it with a fairly little impact and contributes a lot of photos to iNaturalist. And I would encourage everyone here today to visit iNaturalist.org and look for photos that their neighbors have contributed of moths, because they're there. They're there. We have a person here in Boulder who takes dozens and dozens of moth photographs every week, week after week. And I personally have seen hundreds of her photos of Colorado moths. What she does is she puts up a white sheet and then shines a light on it. And that, for a brief time, attracts moths to it. And it just takes her a few minutes to photograph the moth, and then she turns off the light and the moth flies on and does its thing. So it's not like that all night. She doesn't leave it up all night. But probably the less good way to do it is to have a badly designed light that attracts a lot of moths. Because we all know that moths are attracted to our artificial lights, and they're especially attracted to ones that are badly designed. So that's not the way I would recommend to see moths, is by attracting them with bad lights.
Got it. Thank you. Another question that we have here, do you know of any city, county, state incentives for people to switch to lighting that doesn't harm the environment, that are equitable and accessible?
That's a good question. I don't know that any utility companies have made a, a, a benefit to lighting to preserve pollinators. I do know that lots of cities are working to try to get people to do that. So you get lots of pats on the head if you do it. But I don't think you often get rebates from the utility if you do it. I've heard of rebates from the utility for changing over to LED lighting, but that's, as we said, it's not necessarily better. It can be, but it can be bad too.
Okay, thank you. And then I was also curious if you know the species of bees that you mentioned that are nocturnal.
That's a good question, and that would be our for our friends who are entomologists probably. I don't really know all that much about bee species, so it would probably be better to get someone more knowledgeable to talk about that. But I do know that there are a couple of bee species that do fly at night. Beyond that, I can't tell you much about them.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, we will ask our entomology friends for sure. Um, Looks like we've got about a few minutes left here. Please put your questions in the chat if you have any more. Um, but if there are none, any final words of wisdom, Richard?
I think this is a wonderful event, and I really appreciate being here today and being able to talk with all of you folks about this. I think this is an interesting topic, and it's fun for me to discuss, and that's why I do this, is to have fun. I often talk to general audiences which aren't as in tune with nature as the people in this audience probably are, and that really makes a difference. It's really fun for me to do that.
Thank you so much. And it looks like we do have a few more questions that just came in here. One would be, how do fracking pads and burning derricks, how do those affect our light pollution?
Well, the oil and gas industry is one of the worst industries for light pollution. Oil and gas sites have more light pollution than entire cities. There are areas of the what's the grassland up northeast of here? Pawnee National Grasslands, where they've leased it out to oil and gas facilities, and those facilities are more polluting, light polluting, than the city of Denver. They're really bad because for some reason early on the oil and gas industry got the idea that they had to make their facilities super bright all night long, and that's not really true. Actually, people see better if the light isn't quite so intense. So even if the object is to get their employees to be able to see everything well, they could turn down the intensity quite a bit, and it would actually improve their visibility. Obviously have a great impact on the environment too. But yeah, unfortunately, there's not much that we can do if you happen to be near an oil and gas facility. In my experience, those companies are not willing to change anything to help the environment. They're sort of the drill baby drill kind of mentality that, yeah, we're going to pollute as much as we possibly can.
Got it. Another question here. Are there any favorite dark sky areas that you would suggest in the Boulder or Longmont area?
Okay. Well, first of all, the state of Colorado is really blessed that we have like 16 certified dark sky places. Most of them are in western Colorado. The only one in eastern Colorado so far is Jackson Lake State Park, which is about an hour and a half drive away, I think. It's kind of northeast of here. It's toward Nebraska from here, yeah, but it is very dark and a very great place to go. Now, closer into Boulder, we have some areas that are not too bad. The city of Boulder is a little better than the city of Denver, but it's not great. There's no place inside the city limits of Boulder which is really very dark. It's almost all light polluted. However, we're working on a special joint project with Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks to do a series of dark sky events at one of their open space mountain parks properties, which is north of town, north of the city limits, where it is actually quite a bit darker. And we're doing that in August, September, October, November. And we're doing a series of events. So if you're interested in getting out and experiencing dark sky in the Boulder area, that is one possibility for places to go. It's also possible to go up into the mountains a little ways to like Rocky Mountain National Park, which is better than Boulder. And there's a lot that can be seen there. However, it suffers from being only 30 or 40 miles away. And so it's actually light polluted from the urban corridor more than you would expect being that far away. But it's not perfect. It's not a certified dark sky place because it's too close to Denver, basically. Almost all of the other national parks in Colorado are dark sky certified. That would be Great Sand Dunes National Park, Black Canyon and Gunnison National Park, Dinosaur National Monument, Mesa Verde National Park. Those are all certified dark sky parks. So if you want to take a vacation to a really dark place, I would choose one of those.
Yeah, those are all great places and sound like really cool upcoming events that Dark Sky is promoting. And speaking of that, I think we'll kind of end with this question of how can people get involved with Dark Sky?
Yes. Well, there are a couple of different ways. if you're interested in the Dark Sky issue more broadly, then join us in Dark Sky Colorado. You can either go to our Colorado Gives website, or you can go to the Dark Sky International website, and you can pledge a little bit of money and join Dark Sky as a member. And then you'll be in on all of the different things we do, not just for pollinators, but for the stars and for birds and for everything. If you're more interested in the issue of nocturnal pollinators, then probably the thing to do is just be a member of PPAN or Colorado Pollinator Network and come to the pollinator events. And you'll continue to see people like me there talking about nocturnal pollinators, so that won't go away. It's a little bit harder. The website, the Dark Sky International website, has some resources regarding nocturnal pollinators, and it's possible to go there and look around too. And if you dive deeply in there, the international site does a regular review of literature papers, where they will review the literature of light pollution and various different environmental issues. And they'll usually have a couple of paragraphs about nocturnal pollinators in there, which include references to recent studies on nocturnal pollinators and light pollution. So that would be, if you're interested in scientific articles about pollinators and light pollution, that would be a good resource.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. Those all sound like excellent references and organizations to join. And just a reminder for folks too, please make those donations to PPAN and Dark Sky and get that pollinator license plate if you don't have one already. And thank you so much, Richard. This was so informative. I think we all learned a lot, and we really appreciate you being here. And thank you to everyone who joined.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.